It's time for Vax Talk. Let's talk VPDs. We're shaping the conversation about vaccines. To learn more, visit vaxtalk.org.
Hello and welcome to Vax Talk. This is the podcast for people who want to listen to other people talking about vaccines.
That's pretty much by definition what it is.
That is what it is.
And not for bots.
And not for bots or content polluters.
Have you considered that maybe it's the Russian bots that are causing us to keep having technical difficulties here with our recording today, which we've had several of, that no one else out there knows?
No, they don't know, because, I mean, it probably is. It's not content polluters, it's probably bots attacking us for talking about vaccines.
Yeah, back off bots. Although probably they're not going to hear this because probably this is going to get dropped any second now. And so, whatever. But if you hear this, it was a miracle. A miracle happened in front of you, on your iPod, on your phone.
My name is Karen Ernst. I'm the executive director of Voices for Vaccines.
I am Nathan Boonstra. I'm a general pediatrician here at Blank Jones Hospital in Des Moines, Iowa.
And we are going to hear an interview in a few minutes with Jason Mendelsohn, who is also known as Superman HPV. Mm-hmm. It's part of our National Immunization Awareness Month fandango. And even though it's adult week and people usually get their HPV vaccines in adolescence, people can still get their HPV vaccines in adulthood. And HPV vaccines prevent cancers that occur in adulthood. So we thought it was still very relevant for this week.
Yeah, the vaccines FDA approved up through age 26, and you can even after age 26, you can talk with your doctor if you haven't gotten HPV vaccine and you think it might be of benefit to you. You can certainly talk with your doctor, although you probably have to pay out of pocket.
Right. So it's worth thinking about while we're here. Don't forget to get your flu shot this year. And if you're in the doctor's office, don't forget to ask your doctor if you're up to date on all your vaccines or if your doctor recommends more vaccines.
Yeah, it's always worth pointing out that although doctors are pretty good about vaccines, not every adult doctor is thinking about it all the time. So it's worth a question pretty much every time at your checkup to find out if you're up to date with everything you can be.
I agree. And do you know, Nathan, who does not recommend adults go into their doctors and ask about vaccines?
I think Russian bots do not recommend that.
That's exactly it. Russian bots do not recommend that. We don't need a study to tell us that. But we have a study to tell us that the conversations about vaccines on Twitter are being polluted by Russian bots, trolls, and content polluters.
Yeah, it was kind of an interesting one. I did not do my due diligence here and have it pulled up so I can tell the author. But there's a recent study that's had several articles on. Maybe you can do that while I'm yammering on.
I'll put the authors' names in the show notes.
Okay, so it looked at a couple of things. So it kind of looked at Russian bots that were also a part of kind of sowing discord in the 2016 election, and it looked at how often that they were tweeting about vaccinations, and it also looked at what you called content polluters, which are kind of, as I understand it, and nobody's going to peg me for an expert on the topic of like technology in general, but that were accounts that were trying to like distribute malware, viruses, etc., and whatnot. And so those ones, the content polluters, tended to be tweeting anti-vaccine stuff. And I'm not quite sure what the strategy is there. Does that mean that those that were really into anti-vaccine stuff were more likely to fall for the trap?
Maybe, or they just don't have virus protection on their computers.
I see what you did there.
Yeah.
So, and then the ones that were kind of the Russian bots that were implicated in 2016 kind of activities were tended to be both sides, right? They were kind of more discord sowers.
Right. They wanted us yelling at each other.
Yeah. Which is kind of a nice little lesson to take away from this. That it's worth it, that Russian bots, in fact, want to get us to yell at each other because they think that there's some goal in mind that benefits them. So Yeah. So kind of, I think, a good little moral to kind of try to keep. I don't, by no means do I ever want to be the tone police, but on the other hand, it's worth pointing out that there's probably some people benefit from just us getting really angry at each other over this topic.
And the other thing that it seems that they were probably aiming toward was this sort of false balance in the media. So it looked like the debate and the controversy over vaccines was more robust than it actually is. That the debate side of it, the controversy side of it, is really fringe elements that the vast majority of Americans are there together, believing that vaccines are our best ways of combating really bad diseases that we don't want to see.
Yeah, it's actually the same strategy that the anti-vaccine movement tries to use, because they're not really in a position to be the dominant voice, but they are kind of in a position to try to make it seem like they're getting equal footing, or that they're scientifically on par with the pro-vaccine side and whatnot. So that same kind of strategy. And they had, so the hashtag that a lot of the Russian bots were using was hashtag vaccinate US, correct?
Yep.
And you had seen that earlier this week, I think.
I accidentally used it because I thought it was vaccinate us. I didn't understand it was vaccinate US. I was like, oh,
either
vaccinate
way,
us.
It's kind of an odd hashtag to use. Wasn't it? Well, I think it was also a lot of the anti-vaccine tweets would have hashtag vaccinate US, which seems like it's more of a pro-vaccine hashtag, but maybe they thought they were using it ironically. I don't know.
It just shows my middle-agedness that I didn't quite catch on as quickly as I usually do to hashtags. That, I still am sort of an analog thinker instead of a digital thinker.
Maybe you are. Oh, so you're an old-fashioned Russian bot, actually. I think we figured that out. You're using that hashtag. You're speaking of yourself in analog and digital terms, and our computer system here setup keeps crashing. So
it does.
We found the problem.
Yeah, if you like this podcast, know that it's a lot more work than it sounds like.
A lot more work for Karen.
Yeah. Well, let's, with that ugly behind-the-scenes peek, let's go ahead and turn to our interview with Jason Mendelsohn. You usually say roll tape here.
Roll tape!
And here we are again with Jason Mendelsohn. Jason is father of 3 children, 2 twins who are seniors in high school, and an 11-year-old boy. And he has been married for almost 22 years, and he runs his family's business, which is amazing. And he is an HPV cancer survivor and runs a Superman HPV website. And so welcome, Jason. It's so nice to have you here.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
So when was the first time you heard anything about HPV and cancer?
When I got diagnosed is actually when I had first heard about HPV throat cancer. I had actually, I was raised in a medical family, so I knew a lot about other types of cancers, and I knew something about HPV just because, most people know about HPV, but I'd never actually heard about HPV throat cancer until I got the diagnosis back in 2014.
And your diagnosis specifically was?
It was squamous cell carcinoma or stage IV HPV throat cancer. And anyway, I found a bump on my neck, and then I'm sure I'll have more questions about that, but that's what led to the diagnosis.
Right. Yeah, so take us through that. You probably felt pretty healthy, and you found a bump on your neck, and then what happened?
Yeah, the short story is I was taking a financial exam on a Thursday, put my hand on my neck to ponder a question on the test, felt a small bump, thought, I don't have time to think about dying right now, and I was really joking about it at the time, thinking it was probably nothing. A few days later, or actually that night, went to see my father, who's a doctor, and said, "What's this?" And he said, "Let's call the ENT." The ENT told me to come see him in a few weeks because I didn't smoke or drink. And I'm like, I'll see you on Monday because I'm a guy that goes to the doctor.
Right.
And literally was feeling as healthy as I had ever felt my entire life. I'd actually just dropped around 20 pounds and felt truly like I was in the best shape in years. Ended up, the doctor put me on 10 days of antibiotics and steroids. He said, in the slight chance this bump doesn't go away, we'll immediately schedule you for a needle biopsy and CAT scan. And I thought nothing of it. I literally went on the antibiotics, went to the Keys 2 days later on vacation with a bunch of friends, flew to DC where I lobbied on Capitol Hill for my industry, flew home on a Wednesday, Thursday had a CAT scan, Friday had a needle biopsy, Monday found out I had stage 4 cancer.
You had to, I imagine, go home, talk to your wife, and talk to your kids. So what did you tell them?
So when I found out I had this, I was honestly startled, amazed, right? I mean, other people get cancer, not me. And I actually, my wife and my father were with me when I found out about it. I had called, on the ride home, I actually called both of my life insurance agents and said, can you please make sure my policies are on automatic draft? Because I'm the one that handles the finances and I wanted to make sure they didn't lapse just in case I didn't make it. I called a friend who happened to be a radiation oncologist and said, well, it looks like I'm going to become your patient. I actually didn't tell my kids that I had cancer immediately. And initially, because my kids were young at the time, right? Today they're 17 and 11. Back then, they're obviously much younger. And I just thought that was unnecessary. They knew I was going to have, my older kids knew that I was going to have surgery on my neck, but nothing about that it was cancer. I actually didn't tell them about cancer until I was through the surgery and felt, a few months later that I was going to be okay.
So tell us a little bit about going through just the process then after diagnosis, in terms of the surgery, and I know you have a lot to tell in terms of what treatment was like, what kind of side effects there were, what life was like during that.
Yeah, it was pretty brutal. I will tell you, I had a radical tonsillectomy, neck dissection. So my neck dissection means 42 lymph nodes removed from my neck. And then I had 7 weeks of chemo, radiation, and a feeding tube. The biggest concern when you go through radiation to the throat, you'll end up with third-degree burns in your throat. So my concern and what my doctors told me, I said, what's my number one issue here? They said people become dehydrated because it's so painful to swallow, feels like there's glass in your throat, that they don't drink. And so I said, well, what can we do? They said feeding tube. So I had a feeding tube where I had 7 Ensures a day, 2 Gatorades a day. Through that feeding tube, I took my blood pressure probably 20 to 30 times a day because I could tell when my blood pressure got elevated that I was becoming dehydrated. Again, not to be too graphic, but I never threw up during treatment. I never had diarrhea, and I was never sweating. Yet, due to the third-degree burns in my throat, I was dehydrated quickly. A few hours after having fluids, I could become completely dehydrated. So I had to monitor my blood pressure, heart rate, all of that to know when I was becoming dehydrated. I had radiation 5 days a week for 7 weeks. And on Thursdays, I had chemo after radiation. So radiation would be like 15 minutes in the morning. Chemo was pretty much around 8 to 9 hours after that, from beginning to end, from, fluids to treatment to then fluids again. And so it was exhausting, quite honestly. I started that process and probably, 4 weeks into radiation, your saliva can become very thick, which mine did. And so I'm not sure if you understand what that means, is that when you have radiation through the throat, they actually make a mask for your face. You lay on your back, they clip the mask down to a table so you can't move, so you only radiate the part of your mouth and throat that need to be radiated. And then you sit there and you pretty much lay there for, 10, 15 minutes. So as the saliva becomes thick, right, from the radiation and treatment, I don't know what it's like to be waterboarded, but I can tell you that it's very scary to be clipped down on your back and not being able to swallow. So that was, not only exhausting and tiring mentally, but then after 5 to 6 weeks of that, I was in bed 18 hours a day for probably a month, just being worn out from radiation and chemo as well.
So then what was the process after that? How did you come back? I saw some of the things that you wrote on your website about the long haul back into doing the things that you like to do, which I think included biking and whatnot. Tell me about how long that took.
Sure. You know what? So when let me add, because I didn't say earlier that, just to give you an idea of that treatment, I actually, after going through treatment or while I was going through it, was so worried about the outcome that I made videos to my kids that said, one day you're going to get married. I'm not going to be there. This is what's important. And I mentioned that too, because I wanted to mention, as I was going through the treatment, at the beginning, you're really unsure with a big diagnosis like stage 4 throat cancer, if you'll be there long-term for your family.
Right.
So that was in my mind going through treatment. And then when I finally rang the bell, right? You ring the bell when you're done treatment. August 11th was my date, 2014. And I thought, wow, I've crossed the line. Now things are going to get better. What I didn't think about at the time is that the side effects from radiation are cumulative. So it was actually when the hell was going to begin. And again, I'm not trying to be dramatic, but from August 11th, 2014, for the next 3 weeks, all the side effects and all the burns got worse because it was cumulative. So the 3 weeks after that was just exhausting. Once, and that was gagging and choking 20 times a day. Once that was all over, slowly but surely, I began, got off the feeding tube. I could start swallowing again, sipping water. And when you ask about the biking, I was laying in bed during that time, the 18 hours a day, and I got a video from one of my clients out of DC who was doing the Ride to Conquer Cancer. And they had sent a video with my name written on their cycling shirt and mentioned that I was one of the people they were riding for at this large cancer event. And so it was probably 3 to 4 months after that period of finishing treatment that I started training. I actually was feeling better enough where I could start exercising. And they had asked me to train and ride with them the following year in the Ride to Conquer Cancer. And that's what led to my activity in cycling passion at that time.
Do you have, I have a friend who has somewhat of a similar story to yours of HPV throat cancer, and he has his remaining kind of permanent side effects include just not quite being able to taste like he used to. Do you have any permanent side effects or anything like that?
I do. Fortunately, my taste is back. So after treatment, the one taste, which would be sweet, is the last to come back after chemo. And for me, I'm fortunate in that I got my taste back. I probably have 20% less saliva than I used to have, which again, I'm not complaining because I feel fortunate because there's some people that don't get their saliva back at all. So I got, all of my saliva back, probably minus 20%. I get Charlie horses in my neck a few times a month, like you would get in your calf from where I had surgery. And it's basically just, you turn your head the wrong way or a neck and your neck just starts to tighten. I use fluoride gel trays a few times a week. I used to use them 7 days a week to keep my teeth strong. Due to lack of saliva, your teeth can become problematic, as well as from radiation to the throat. The blood supply to the jaw can be a problem. So if you ever have to have a tooth extracted once you've been through radiation to the throat, you need to go see or let your dentist speak to your radiation oncologist. So, and I use Floridex toothpaste. So I use that to keep my teeth strong as well. Oh, and then lastly, I take Mucinex every day because it keeps my saliva a little thinner than it would be otherwise. it sounds like I keep thinking I don't have many side effects, but whenever I describe them, like I think I just take things like I'm naturally a positive person. Like every morning I get up and I shower, I put hot water in my throat so I can make sure I get any thick saliva out of my throat, right? I sip water all day, but it still seems, a few years ago I didn't think I was going to live, so
Right.
I don't really think about these except when I'm describing them to people.
Right. Well, I was going to say it might be because, you described driving home from the oncologist and calling to make sure your insurance was the way it needed to be, and making tapes for your kids because you were certain you weren't going to be there for them. So it may be that your expectations are such that you're grateful to have to deal with fluoride trays and diminished saliva and having to take Mucinex, that those are sort of emblems of your survival.
Yeah, I think you're right. I didn't do this at the beginning, but when I describe our family, if you're familiar with the Waltons from TV from years ago, like John Boy, that group. So, and if you're familiar with My Big Fat Greek Wedding, where family's really involved, I always describe us as we're a combination of the two of those families and then sprinkled Judaism on top, and that's us. My brother is my next door neighbor. And our family business, so I'm president of our firm, my brother's CEO, sister's EVP, father's on the board. So we are literally always together. So the idea that years ago, I wasn't going to be seeing the age of 45 in my head to, turning 49 here in September really makes me grateful, right? There's a lot of gratitude. I don't complain very much, like when you fly or travel or do things and people are going crazy when planes are late. I'm the guy that always thinks in my head, it's not cancer.
Yeah.
Like these little things, the steak's not cooked well enough, not a time to like unload on the server because, again, not cancer. It's not my last meal. So I'm always thinking about things like that, which I think probably is the reason my outlook is positive when people speak to me.
You bring up this closely knit, almost television-esque family, and one of the things that I hear from other survivors is how little emphasis there is on how the diagnosis and the treatment affects the family in some pretty serious ways. I mean, you're describing how you were basically out of commission for weeks and weeks and needed help with everything. How did this affect your family, your kids, that dynamic? That must have been a very difficult time.
It was very difficult. I'm a guy who speaks to my parents daily. So my parents literally live 5 minutes from my house. And so we're always together. And so our kids were young at the time. And my wife's biggest job was to protect our kids from me, which I choke up every time I say this. And even though it's a few years later, it actually really hurts me to my core. But so what I mean by that is I was always pleasant, but I did not want my kids to worry for 1 minute that their father was going to pass away. Right? That's a heavy burden for kids to think about when they're going to school or with their friends or trying to go to bed at night. So my wife's job was keep our kids' lives as normal as possible, so they are not always thinking about cancer and whether their dad's going to make it. So I would tell you one of the largest burdens, if not the largest, was probably on my wife, right? She's a rock. I've known her forever. We've been married almost 22 years, but I've known her since, I've been 10. And the fact that she could maintain strength around our kids while also caring for me and keeping the rest of the house in order and everything moving forward is really very impressive to me. She's awesome, but I would say it probably at the greatest level affected her. I think my kids were young, so they knew about it. They would come in and put their head on my shoulder, but I don't think they understood how serious the situation could have been had it gone another direction. My family business, I will tell you, my brother and sister and father had to work extremely hard while I was out of commission for 6 months or more because they were doing the work for all of us. So while everyone was worried about me, they would always come over and check on me. They were having to do all my work, which was exhausting. And again, I know you'll like this. Hopefully you'll think this is somewhat comical. But when, my parents knowing that their oldest son had cancer, everyone knows that parents love their oldest kid the most. So I think that was probably, mentally exhausting for them, right? In general, in life, people know that parents are supposed to pass away before their kids.
Yeah.
That's the way it works. And while that is sad in and of itself for all of us who, are crazy and love our parents, the fact that they knew that I had cancer, I know was just mentally exhausting 24 hours a day. So I guess hopefully that's not too much, but that's our family.
Yeah.
And my friends were also great visiting often. So again, that's how it impacted the people around me.
I want to point out to everyone who's listening that you've been with your wife for a very long time. And I think that's important because it's related to how HPV cancers manifest and why people sometimes don't see the need for an HPV vaccine, that you can catch HPV and not see the effects for a couple of decades. So what have you learned sort of about throat cancer and HPV disease since becoming an HPV cancer patient and survivor?
Sure. And and thank you so much for asking the question, because this is really critical and important to me. I mean, I'm sure we'll talk a little bit later about the website that I launched, but being cancer-free and being able to help others through sharing my stories is the reason I do what I do, right? Many people say, why don't you move on? You survived. Why do you have to keep sharing it? And it's because of what I'm about to share with you now that it's so important to me. Because I was raised by parents who always said, do what's right, even when it's not easy, and be good to the people around you, right? Tell the truth, be honest, help others. And so they believe I got the virus when I was in my late teens. I believe the numbers are, something like 98% of the people, when they get the HPV virus, it clears and they never know that they had it. Everyone pretty much is in agreement that 3 out of 4 adults by age 30 have HPV, 62% of freshmen in college, and men between 40 and 60 are the most highly diagnosed with HPV throat cancer. That I learned after the fact, right? I think I told you earlier that I'm on the executive board for the Head and Neck Cancer Alliance, and I'm always trying to learn and help others. The fact that I got this virus when I was in my late teens, probably in college, you didn't say it, hopefully I'm allowed to say it, but typically it's transmitted through oral sex with a woman with HPV is the reason they say men are the largest number getting this, although women get it as well, and others, other types of, obviously, cancers exist. But had the HPV vaccine been available when I was 11 or 12, I would have likely never gotten cancer. And I get asked all the time, or when I share my story, people always say to me, oh, I'm so glad I heard your story. I gave the vaccine to my daughter, not to my son. I had no idea it was for boys. And when I tell you, this is said to me weekly, because when I'm traveling for work, which I do often, and people tell me they have kids or grandkids between 9 and 26, I always tell them my story for 2 minutes. Figure, even though they don't know me well, if I can stop their children or their grandchildren from ever getting the cancer I got, and decades later they're protected, I think that's important. But they do believe that I got the virus. It lay dormant in my body from my, and years later, right? So I was probably in my late teens. I got diagnosed and felt the bump at age 44. That's what transpired. My father's best friend got diagnosed at 73. He'd been married 50 years.
Oh, wow.
I deal with people all over the country. As part of the Head and Neck Cancer Alliance, I'm helping form a survivor patient caregiver network globally. I'm really focused right now in the US, but I'm dealing with people just like me all over the country, married 20 plus years, kids, and they always say cancer doesn't discriminate. They literally have my exact same story, and it's typically decades later that it's surfacing, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's what you were looking for, but I hope that
Oh yeah.
shed some light on what I've learned.
Yeah, when you talk about those families that have immunized their daughters but not their sons, the statistic that I always bring up, if I can remember it accurately off the top of my head, is somewhere around 26,000 cases of HPV-associated cancer a year in the United States, and a good third of those are in males. Most of those are your head and neck cancers, and then you have some of the other ones, the penile and anal cancers. But it's not a small sliver, and I think that's, it's not a small sliver of these cancers that are in males. It's a good chunk. And that's not driven home enough because it's so often thought of as the cervical cancer vaccine.
Right.
And we really need to work on somehow messaging really well that, yes, this is a very important cervical cancer vaccine, but it is not only a cervical cancer vaccine.
Right.
And so often, I think Karen and I will both see online, we'll be having a discussion somewhere about, or there'll be some news story about the HPV vaccine and how so-and-so is now some country now starting to give.
The UK this week.
Yeah, they'll start giving it to males, and then some people are on there making cracks about, oh, how fantastic it is that those boys are not going to get cervical cancer. And I'm like, it boils my blood.
Because I'm very active with helping to educate people through, my Facebook and through Twitter and through, just webinars like this. But this year in 2018, you likely know that HPV throat cancer surpassed cervical cancer. Mm-hmm. And we've been working in various discussions I've been with, trying and hoping that the vaccine will become indicated for HPV throat cancer, right? The reason most people think it's only for cervical cancer is because that's, what's been proven to work towards preventing. But everyone knows that knows about HPV throat cancer, that the way people get that is through, typically, I hope you don't mind me saying, oral sex with someone that has HPV, although they're saying it could be from other ways as well, right? Just saliva exchange. People have even said deep kissing. But again, I think as people begin to realize that their friends, family members, and others that, are being diagnosed, I think it's going to become it is more of an epidemic. And the more people go public and share their stories, the more parents will understand that it's not just for their daughters.
The thing, too, that I see happening that could become more prevalent in the next few years is that so many of the men being diagnosed with HPV throat cancers are that 40-something age where they have kids who are, tweens and teens and in that age group to get vaccinated. And a lot of times what happens with men with any health issue, but particularly with throat cancer, is that they sort of retreat into themselves and no one sees what the struggle is like. No one sees what the battle against throat cancer is like. But you've been public, and I do want to ask you about going public, why you decided to go public, and what you've been working on and hoping to accomplish.
Thank you for asking. So I always tell people that, I'm not trying to become famous. I think there's some people that go in the media because they want to become well known. So I have no desire to become famous. My single purpose is to have my cancer story shared in as many languages as possible on all 7 continents to save lives worldwide. And hopefully you'll like this little story. But the reason I feel that way is when I first got diagnosed and I went through treatment, a local Jewish newspaper in Orlando, who literally, they've been around forever, the Heritage, and they even published my bar mitzvah when I was a kid. Well, they shared my story in the local paper. Well, I found out through a series of connections that there's this organization that deals with all the other papers. Well, it turned out the Jewish papers in Minneapolis, Memphis, Denver, Tucson, all over the country, Oregon Jewish News, all of them started sharing my story. Well, I was speaking to my family and I said, you know what? I'm glad that I'm saving lives within the Jewish community, but reality is this isn't good enough. People, Christian children should be saved from this cancer. kids from France, kids. And I started thinking, you know what? It's awesome. Don't misunderstand me, but everyone should have access to this vaccine that could, eliminate them ever getting this cancer, whether it's, HPV, cervical cancer, or throat cancer, or any of the other, penile, anal, any of them. But I thought at the time, how do I reach people worldwide and protect not only the people that I know here, but worldwide, right? I mean, that's ultimately, to me, that's what's important. Helping, doing good, really just protecting as many people as possible. That's why I launched the supermanhpv.com website. I sell nothing on that website. I launched the website back in October. I met with a woman every week to try to make it so it would be the most effective. And I launched the website. I got a call from an NBC News reporter, Maggie Fox. I was at a conference meeting and she's like, "Hi, is this Jason Mendelsohn?" And I said, "Yes." She said, I'm writing an article about HPV. I found your website. I'd like to interview you. Would that be okay? I'm like, yes, that's the whole reason I actually launched the website, is I was trying to get the word out. She interviews me. The next day, that evening, I get like 11 emails from people all over the country saying, "I'm so glad I heard your story."
Wow.
It made them feel better. So I emailed her quickly and I said, "I want you to know your website or your article is a big hit." 11 people emailed me. She goes, "Jason, you are likely going to be getting a call from NBC Nightly News. 500,000 people read the article."
Wow.
The next day I go to the airport. I'm leaving to go to a meeting in Nashville. And my phone rings. I'm not 1 foot out of my car. My phone rings and it says, Hi, this is so-and-so. I'm an NBC, part of the medical team. We'd like to interview you. I'm like, "That's awesome. I'm going to Nashville. What time next week would you like to do that?" They go, "Actually, we've already sent a team to your house.
Oh, gosh.
We'll be there in 2 hours."
Oh, man.
I'm like, "Well, I'm kind of flying to Nashville. Can we do it in Nashville?" They go, No, we do it in people's homes." So I at first thought, I'm like, "Oh my gosh, what's the change fee going to be?" It was so silly. Like I was not thinking clearly because it was so startled. And so hopefully you'll get a kick out of this. But I thought, you know what, if I was ever going to get divorced in my entire life, it would have been that next phone call to my wife to say, "Hey, Ronnie," I said, "Ronnie, where are you?" She told me what she was doing. I don't remember what it was. I said, "Listen, NBC Nightly News is going to be at our house in 2 hours.
Oh, gosh.
And we should be on NBC, and we should be on the Nightly News this evening." And she was so funny. She was like, "I need to get my hair done, my nails done." Like it was like clockwork. I literally drove home from the airport. NBC News showed up less than an hour later, and we got interviewed. And it showed up that night. I left to go back to my meeting, or to go to my meeting, and I was at the airport waiting for my flight, and it showed up on the news.
Oh my gosh!
Right there, and I gave a little mini HPV HPV seminar to the people at the bar next to my flight because I was on the news. But I think it's that ability to educate people and to know that I'm actually making a difference. I probably have 20 something discussions a week where people didn't know about it or hadn't given the vaccine or didn't understand what the pediatrician was saying when they brought up about the HPV vaccine because they talked about sex and HPV being the most common sexually transmitted disease, instead of discussing it as an anti-cancer vaccine, which I always say to people, if there was a vaccine and people said this will cure breast cancer, everyone would give it to their daughters. If someone said, here's a vaccine, it will cure prostate cancer, everybody would give it to their sons. The problem with the HPV vaccine, again, I'm sharing this with you as a non-doctor, because I tell people to go see their kids' pediatricians or family practice doctor. I don't tell people to get the vaccine. I say, speak to your medical, speak to your doctor. Sure. And the problem is everyone discusses it about sex and no one says it's an anti-cancer vaccine. And I think
we're working on that on our end.
I was going to say, I know that's changing because I've done multiple webinars that have 20-something plus physicians on them. And I'm trying to do as much as I can to get people to think in that manner.
Yeah, that's an effort that's ongoing. So it's something that it has been well understood and studied that, for the low HPV rates that we have in this country, it is 1 part parental / patient hesitation and 1 part provider, doctor / medical provider, hesitation there too. And so that's improving, but there's a lot of effort, as much put into that side of it, I think, as into the other side of it, because it's that important.
People always ask me, is that what Michael Douglas had? Like, people always ask me, is this one? And my answer always is, and I'm happy to say it just like what we're saying right now, is I always tell people this is the one thing he and I have in common outside of our love for Catherine Zeta-Jones. But people always say, it must have been exhausting laying in bed 18 hours a day for the month of August. And I always tell people, yes, the only good thing is that I got to watch 7 years of Lost in 2.5 weeks.
Oh my gosh. Hey, that really hits home with Karen and me too.
Yeah, it does.
Both huge Lost fans.
Okay,
Yes.
So did you love everything about it except the last episode?
I actually even loved the last episode.
Did you?
I actually like a lot about it. Even the last season and the last episode, I found a lot to like in it. It was not a slam dunk, but it was, I don't know.
I thought it was better than The
enjoyable.
Sopranos last episode, so.
I like that. Yeah.
Jason, what is in your future? What are you planning in the near future?
Thank you for asking. I'm very excited to share that we just got approval to have a Smash Cancer tennis tournament at the USTA National Campus in Lake Nona, Florida, which is just outside of Orlando. And I'm having that event, raising funds to be able to provide transportation, so gas cards primarily, for patients that need assistance getting to chemo and radiation appointments. I was fortunate not to need assistance, but I know there are plenty of people that need assistance, as well as raising money for people that need assistance with dental care. My ENT told me a story where he actually was removing teeth because people couldn't afford dental care. And it just seems like people need assistance and that we can provide it.
Absolutely. That's wonderful. And if people want to learn more about you, learn more about Superman HPV, learn more about throat and neck cancers, where can they find you on the internet?
So you can certainly just Google my name, right? Jason Mendelsohn HPV. But also I am on Facebook, either my first name, last name, and primarily Superman HPV is on Facebook, as well as I have a website, supermanhpv.com. And I'm on Twitter, same thing, Superman HPV. And I'm accessible and would love to help anyone who's looking for information, whether it be about the vaccine or about HPV, throat cancer, HPV in general. So anything I can do. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for joining us and for all your generosity and sharing your story with us today, Jason.
Thank you.
And thank you, everyone who tuned in and listened today. My name is Karen Ernst. I am the Executive Director of Voices for Vaccines. You can find Voices for Vaccines at voicesforvaccines.org.
And I'm Nathan Boonstra. I'm a general pediatrician here in Des Moines, Iowa. And you can find me at my blog, petsgeekmd.com.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.